government. And then another one that my favorite is Afghans don't consider themselves Afghans. All three are untrue. If you ask an Afghan what he is, he'll say, I'm an Afghan. And they have that sense. There have been strong central governments, different from what you think, but there have been, in the sense of governance, there have been periods when Afghanistan absolutely had a central government. And so we got to start by not accepting any of the generally accepted bumper sticker truths. What are some real truths? It's complex, difficult terrain, both the land and the people. It's a tribal society with a culture vastly different from what most of us are familiar with. And it varies around the country. So you can't assume that what is true in one province is true in another. That's true for ethnic reasons, geographic reasons, economic reasons. In fact, you can't assume that what is true in one valley is true in the next valley, any more than you can assume that one neighborhood in London is exactly the same as another neighborhood. We wouldn't generalize here, but yet sometimes as outsiders we want to do that. The other thing I would remind people is, and you hear a lot about it, 30 years of war. We've been at it 8 years. The Afghans have been at it 30. The life expectancy in Afghanistan is 44 years old. So if you do the math, there aren't that many people who remember pre-conflict life in Afghanistan. In that 30 years, they had about 10 years of fighting the Soviets, 79 to about 89. 6 years of what you could call warlordism, 89 to 95. 6 years of Taliban rule, and of course civil war throughout that period, 95 to 2001, and then 8 more years of fighting. One elder said something that really struck me one night as we were talking, and he said, what you see in Afghanistan now is a reflection of pieces of each of those eras. It's not one, it's now a mosaic of the experiences of all those eras. If you think about 30 years on people and on a society, calculations change. The certainty that you have when you walk in your neighborhood in London is not the certainty they have. The expectation of the future is not the expectation they might have. The opportunity to have been educated, the opportunity to have associated with different ethnic groups, since that has become more of a challenge in recent years, are all very different. The society is what I would call damaged. Individuals may not be damaged, but the society, that which reflected before, is damaged. It's not as it was. But it's not uniformly, nor can you say it's all different here. Tribal structures, relationships, and expectations are uncertain now. When you go into a village in a Pashtun area, traditionally you could have gone out and you could have predicted what the role of the mullah would be, of the malik, of the elders, of the khan. You could predict their roles and their interrelationships. That's not true anymore. It varies based upon the experience of that area. In some areas, some have disproportionate influence, some have none, some they've been killed. In other cases, elements like the Taliban have come in and completely turned upside down the traditional structures. Nor can you assume the traditional structures are gone. So you have to go in and learn what the structure is and how people are dealing with it. So what we face is a uniquely complex environment where 3 regional and resilient insurgencies, we don't just have one in Afghanistan, we've got at least 3. And then there are other sub-insurgencies. And they've intersected together on top of a dynamic blend of local power struggles in a country damaged by 30 years of war. And then you run into the person who raises a finger and says, here's the solution. They can have my job. They find that guy. We also face a crisis of confidence. Afghans are frustrated after 8 years of the most recent war because in 2001 their expectations skyrocketed. Along with the arrival of coalition forces, they expected a positive change. Initially they saw that, and then they waited for other changes. economic development, improvements in governance that in many cases may have been unrealistic, but in many cases were unmet. And therefore there's a mismatch between what they hoped for and what they have experienced. And again, as we learn in all societies, it's the expectation, the perception that matters often as much as the reality. What's the situation now? Anyone who's read the assessment, and if you're here, you probably did, the situation is serious, and I choose that word very, very carefully. I also say that neither success or failure for our endeavor there in support of the Afghan people and the government can be taken for granted. My assessment, my best military judgment as I term it, is that the situation is in some ways deteriorating. But not in all ways. I can also point out ways where tremendous progress is evident. The construction of roads, clean water, access to health care, children in school, access to education for females are all up dramatically, and those are hugely positive and portend well for the future. But a tremendous number of villagers live in fear, and we have officials who either cannot or do not serve their people effectively. And violence is up, and it is not up only because there are more coalition forces. It is up because the insurgency has grown. We need to reverse the current trends, and time does matter. Waiting does not prolong a favorable outcome. This effort will not remain winnable indefinitely. Public support will not last indefinitely. But the cruel irony is that to succeed, we need patience, discipline, resolve, and time. Okay, who's winning? This ought to be a headline. Well, it depends on who you ask. This is not a game with a score. It's not like a football game with points on a scoreboard. Real football, American football. It's more like a political debate where both sides announce after the debate that they won. And that matters because we're not the scorekeepers. Not NATO ISAF, not our governments, not even our press. The perception on all of those entities will matter. They will affect the situation. But in the end, this is going to be decided in the minds and perceptions of the Afghan people. The perception of the government of Afghanistan, the perception of the insurgents, whether they can or are winning, and then most importantly, the perception of the villager who casts his lot with the winners. And villagers are supremely practical people. They are rational, practical people. They make the decision